Well, hello, folks, and welcome back to week 3 of our discovery and discussion of Tom Hanks. Our first week, we talked about his 1980s run, which is kind of a weird group of comedies, and we talked about, in particular, the film Big. Last week, we talked about his 1990s run, and in particular, Apollo 13, because the 1990s was really when Tom Hanks tried to win an Oscar and was successful. And this week, we're going to talk his 2000s run and focus on the film The Terminal. And with me today, my co-host Zach. How you doing, Zach?
Doing good. For some reason, I was doing a weird jaw thing because it's what I felt like doing in the moment. I was deep in thought about my our next subject of first movies and trying to come up with some Walking Phoenix takes, and then I just like stuck into my jaw.
All right. Well, you've kind of already tipped our hand to it. We start the show with a little bit of what's the last film we logged on Letterboxd? So, Zach, last film you logged on Letterboxd.
Yeah. So I don't watch anything without a purpose because I'm a psycho and a crazy person. So I've been watching a lot of movies from 2009 because it was a year that came up on a random year generator, a random number generator. Um, And so I watched Two Lovers, James Gray's Two Lovers. James Gray, a topic that one day I'll convince Lucas to do as a month for the show because I'm a big fan of him. And I think uh, he has a very patient and like urban touch to his movies that I love. And I think that's what carries Two Lovers a lot. I think there's also a lot of subtlety in how it deals with, romances and unrequited love slash emotional love versus like a different version. It's all emotional love, but like one of it is like true is people being there for you, or the like love you have for being there for someone else. That being dependent on is like a whole different and kind of unhealthy form of love that you just like someone to depend on you. And it does deals with that in complex ways. But it also has Joaquin Phoenix, and I have some serious issues with him as an actor. If we ever do a month on Joaquin Phoenix, it'll be like the month that everyone cancels me as someone who has valid movie tastes. I think there's like something infantile about him, something that has not matured, and his characters always I have a hard time treating as like responsible adults because he just doesn't seem fully there in his roles. I don't know. So that I think is still definitely there because I actually sometimes I will give things a nice letterbox review and then I go back in 12 minutes later and I change my thoughts. So it went down from a 9 and 8 because Joaquin Phoenix has been haunting me with his kid like presence.
All right. I have not seen this film. I have seen some of James Gray's work. Actually, I like him a lot. Just maybe not as high on him as you are.
Or
Um,
I'm going to sneak in James Gray when we do River Month, which is like a real Zach thing. We're going to talk about boats and jungle rivers, and we're going to do Lost City of Z.
I'm not against this as a topic. So the last movie I logged was John Hughes' film 16 Candles, which is not very good. Um,
No.
it's it's there's a lot of problematic stuff in it. The movie starts with like a random tracking ass shot of some teenagers, which is kind of problematic that we're following teenagers like this. And then we kind of spend the rest of the movie doing sort of sexual assaulty things and kind of ogling people. Also, take that all out for a second. It's not a very interesting film. Even if you don't find it to be problematic, I just don't think it's very interesting or has much to say. And you kind of get to the end of it and you're like, "Oh, I guess this is over?" Yeah, just not very good. And like I like some of his other films just a lot more.
I think if anything works, and the purpose of it, I think, is just like writing on Molly Ringwald's charm and presence. And I
Yeah.
think her parts carry, and you're just interested in her as like a normal teenager because she just comes off so much as a normal teenager. So I think that's part of the purpose. You just seeing, what a day in the life of a teenager can be. But they also think, yeah, normal teenagers love drunk rape. Um, because when you're saying how problematic it was, everyone when they talk about the first thing comes up is the Asian stereotypes, and like that's horrible. But like,
Yeah,
how's
it's not
everyone
good.
forget that the guy that we're supposed to be rooting for to end up with Wally Ringwald straight up gives his girlfriend to the comedic presence for a drunken rape. He says, "Oh, she's drunk. She won't remember. You can do what you want with her." and this is supposed to
Yeah,
be like good for him. Yeah,
and the movie treats it
and
as
his
like,
car.
and he basically like takes her to his friends to photograph her, which is creepy. And then the next morning they wake up, have no memory of this, but she like really likes being with him.
Yeah,
This
she's happy about it. She's like
this
that was.
freshman that you're like a senior with, it's just like it makes
She was
no
fully
sense
okay with that she got assaulted in the middle of the night.
because the movie doesn't really
Think
is
it's
not
serious.
it's not complicated enough to let that character acknowledge what has just happened to her and
Yeah,
just kind of plays it off as a joke. And yeah, really doesn't work.
it's real problematic.
Yeah, it's not good. All right, let's move on to a film that is a lot less problematic, which is this week's The Terminal.
Sure, you can find something in there. It's
Yeah,
problematic.
but
Let's
this movie,
spend an hour digging deep, finding out where did Tom Hanks go racist.
I think the good news about this movie does not condone sexual assault in any way,
No,
so we can at least move on to that.
I will
And
know.
so we're going to start our discussion of The Terminal the way we always start a discussion of movies, with the Zack Ford special movie plot summary. Because if you haven't realized it already, Zack, not great at movie summaries, but he's going to give it a shot.
Hey, I've
Zack?
been doing real well and a lot better than me trying to tell you the plot of Family Plot 15 minutes ago off recording where I was like, there's like something with like what do you call it when you see ghosts? That's the best I can do with Family Plot. I saw it 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So this guy, he was on a plane from his Krakosia. He appears homeless. No one knows why. He was like shaving his beard in the middle of the airport. He couldn't shave before the plane. How long was this plane? Where's Krakosia? No one knows. Okay, he gets off the plane and he gets detained by security because his passport was declined. And master security person Stanley Tucci. That's like the most important job in the world. We'll talk an hour about this. There's no more important person in the safety of our country than Stanley Tucci. And he says, "Your country has had a revolution," and this is exactly how he says it. And you're a man without country. You are like, was it undesirable? I don't know.
No, he's in the crack of the education system.
He's in the crack. Um, so you have to just like hang out in this airport for an unknown amount of time until we can the United States recognizes your country. So he like hangs around. He like makes a water fountain mural. He makes people fall in love. Um, he hangs out in like every immigrant or blue collar airport worker falls in love with him. He's a hero of the working man, of specifically the airport working man. And everyone falls in love with him, all so he can go get jazz signatures. That's all I got. And Catherine Zeta Jones is there for some reason, falling in love with him.
Yeah, yeah, all right, yeah, that works. That works. All right. Let's get to our main discussion of the film. Zach and I watch these movies. We come up with some like specific talking points we want to discuss. And this week, we want to start our discussion talking about Tom Hanks and Spielberg. So this is, of course, The Terminals, directed by Steven Spielberg. And so Hanks and Spielberg have worked together multiple times. Saving Private Ryan, Catch Me If You Can. This movie, Bridge of Spies, and The Post. Do we forget any?
I'm not gonna lie, I did pay attention for a second. I was
I'm
looking at our list.
Thank
And
you.
not completely so. I was looking at the agenda for the day. Okay. But
Yes.
yes, I think you got them all. Let's just say there's five. So I think you got them all.
Yeah, I think we did. I think we're good. And so this is an interesting it's an interesting partnership if you think about it, because this is one of the biggest actors and the biggest directors working together, and they make some weird films. I think you could make
Yeah.
the argument.
And
Like,
they both hit each other in a weird part of their careers that led to that. I think they're both in the latter half of just like past their prime.
it's like there's some weird transition periods that they emerge in. So Saving Private Ryan from the 90s is kind of like, that's the one where it's really the high level director and the high level actor meeting together and making a film. And then Catch Me If You Can is kind of some more of that, but you kind of throw another character in.
But I feel like Catch Me If You Can is really that point for both of them, where I feel like their career just starts to get a little less like top level important. Like they're not the main people of Hollywood anymore.
I would argue Catch Me If You Can is kind of is the end of that, and then The Terminal is kind of full blown in the midst of them on a little bit
That's
of a downscape.
maybe what yeah.
And then you continue into the 2010s and you hit Bridge of Spies, which is kind of, I think people like the film, but I don't think anyone's like, got to it. Like Bridge of Spies and the poster kind of in very similar buckets in that they are Oscar nominated, based on true story movies where they work together. But I don't think anyone is out there proclaiming either of these movies to be particularly amazing or great or somehow groundbreaking. They're just kind of very functional. They work really well, but they don't really blow you away.
But what I think is important is I think their partnership maybe was due to simpatico tastes. I feel like their
Yeah.
careers both evolved naturally in a very similar direction, where there's a lot more, especially in 2010s, we'll talk about next week, a lot more in the true stories. They're in the like history, and like noble heroes we talked about with Hanks. And I think Spielberg is just equally interested in that because he did stuff without Hanks doing that, like Lincoln. And Hanks has done stuff outside of that, like Captain Phillips and Sully, and they just kind of unite in that kind of picture.
And I think Terminal in some ways is kind of the most simpatico of the two of them, because this is a role that I feel like in any other actor's hands, it's utterly a joke character. And Hanks is kind of the only person who can add a little earnestness to him to make you kind of see him as a real person. I feel like almost anyone else, it would have been like, is this an Adam Sandler movie?
Yeah, or this could have been like a Will Ferrell early 2000s comedy easily.
Right. Like you
Doing
could have
an
just played this
accent.
for laugh. And Spielberg even kind of makes the, even the airport is turned a little like it's almost like a fantasy place in some ways by Spielberg, and you can very see like he kind of brings the same mentality he brought to stuff like Raiders or Jurassic Park to the Terminal in kind of an unconventional like melding of that mindset and
But
location.
I think that melding is maybe also the problem. Because now that I brought this up, like I want to watch this Will Ferrell version, and I'm pretty into that idea.
It
Especially like post Elf, just right. That's still kind of just pure goofy, silly
would be
Ferrell.
interesting. It would
It
be
would have been
interesting.
good, but I think the Spielberg trying to get some sentimentality with a little bit of lightness and some serious content as well, with revolutions happening in country and how people can get fall through the cracks of the immigration system. I feel like he tries to put it all together to where none of it's getting the necessary focus, and it just seems like a muddled mess of a movie. So I blame Spielberg. He's a crappy director, and no one likes him.
I don't agree with that last point, but I do think that there is a valid case to make that this movie has too many plot lines, that it is too focused on Tucci as an individual and like his promotion, Hanks's attempt to like get somewhere, Hanks's romance, other romances, other characters, and I feel like
There's so much.
it really starts off as an immigration law movie and then rapidly gets away from that for
It,
basically an hour and a half, and then
it's
kind of gets back to it at the end in a way that is the tone is a little interesting at times.
I think this is like Spielberg's only time that he tried to do kind of a rambling hangout movie, just like watching Tom Hanks hang out in the airport and interact with different people. I don't think he's ever done a rambling movie like this. Like Linkletter might have, has more experience in
Yeah.
that kind of environment, maybe had to have a different touch and be able to give out equal balance to every, the whole community and all the people. But Spielberg, I don't think is able to balance all the characters and make them rich enough in their short amount of period of time to
Yeah.
handle an ensemble that big. But
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. He probably should have focused more on one of the storylines and maybe pushed the other ones a little bit farther back, just to give it a little bit more structure. Um, you wanted to talk about how you think this is a weird role for Hanks to take.
yeah, so I want to talk about later when we talk about his themes. I'm going to talk about how he really was, I think, doing a lot of experimenting and trying for acting challenges. I feel like he became so, acclaimed in this go-to, as we said, the noble hero actor, through the '90s, and he goes back to that eventually. But the 2000s is he's like just doing weird shit that no one would expect him to do, and this is a weird shit, not as extreme as anything else, but it's like I'm gonna do 45 minutes where like I can only say Krakosia, And I feel like that's what attracted him to this role because there's not
Mhm.
much that's otherwise, but I think it was the acting challenge of I'm going to play, a foreign person that's a fish out of water, but also like has a language barrier, and that seems like enough of an acting challenge for him to try to do that. He goes from talking to no one in Castaway to communicating people, but in a manner that has to be different than having a shared language. Um, I think it works for the most part. I think he's able to pull it off, but also I think makes it a little silly at
Yeah.
times.
I actually think he's really good in the beginning of the film. I think he's really good at playing that like the foreigner who wants to be friendly to Americans because he thinks if I'm nice to them, they'll be nice to me. That's why he keeps like in the interactions with the immigration people, he's always smiling at them. He's trying, and he keeps thinking that he can like he doesn't like clearly there's a language barrier, but also he's like if I smile and I'm nice, then they'll just kind of let me through.
And I agree, and I was more on board, and I'm connecting this to another idea I had later, so we're just going to do it now. But I think one of the main issues is they don't have enough trust in them being able to pull off the experiment of having language barrier, which I think is very important, having communication beyond language.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, he just like knows fluent English. He's a halfway through the movie. I guess a lot of time passed. I have no idea. I could have thought it was like a week long, and all of a sudden he's having full conversations. Not only having full conversations, but like interpreting for other passengers. There's a guy that is trying to take medicine, and he'll hold him at gunpoint as he's trying to take drugs, and he is
Yeah.
an interpreter for him. All of a sudden, he was the one that needed an interpreter, and he goes from knowing nothing to being able to help out the airport with language things. And so I think that gets rid of that interesting aspect of, or that an interesting theme of communication beyond language.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was some really cool stuff at the beginning watching Hank play kind of the panic of somebody who like knows they don't know how to communicate. Like he's looking up at these TVs and he's seeing the name of his country, but
Yeah.
he doesn't know how to read what's there. He sees that something is bad. He can tell from context clues. And no one around is helping because of course you're not helping. It's an airport. If you talk to me in an airport and tried to get me to help you, I don't like that's just very like an American thing. It's like that's kind of an interesting place to be. It's just a lot of Americans are just like, no, I don't want to have a conversation with a random person in the airport. Yeah, I think they do they do make him jump languages really quickly. And I think there's an argument to be made that you could make the argument if you did a better job of saying, hey, he's from a foreign country. People from foreign countries often learn several languages. Maybe he'd just be better at learning languages because he knows more to begin with. So I don't think translating for the Russian guy is as a big deal, but it does, though, that he can speak English so well.
I think the main problem with the quick language development is not that he can speak also, it's that they don't establish a time period.
No, and I agree. I agree that's one of the biggest problems in the movie. How
So to
long is
me,
he?
it seems
How
like
long
he's
is?
also speaks within days, but it
How,
could be years or months.
absolutely. How long is he pushing carts around to collect quarters?
Yeah,
How long is
exactly.
he doing construction? Like you could make the argument for a week. You could make the argument he's doing that for months. Like there's a moment in the movie where Catherine Zeta-Jones says she's leaving for 13 days, and we just kind of jump 13 days, but there's not like unless you are specifically paying attention to her timeline, like there's no way to know that they don't do a good job of um even just like
Yeah.
context clues. Like you could put something on the screen, you could show a newspaper, you could show a TV broadcast. There's a lot
And
of different ways to
honestly,
show time passing.
they don't even have to try that hard because part of the point of the movie is like look at this guy having to live for a long time in the airport.
Right.
When you're really the span of time is important to this film. There's no reason they can't like put day 90 like they do in like Castaway of like how many days they were on there to establish.
Oh,
I think it's
absolutely. Yeah.
okay to put like day 90 stuck in the airport or just
Yeah.
have him marking on the wall of his prison cell terminal in chalk.
I actually do think the day 90 thing would have worked really effectively. I think part of the reason they don't do that is they don't want to reckon with like the less fun aspects of being stuck in an airport so long. Like they don't want to reckon with the
They
fact that if
don't
they
at all.
start telling you days, then they have to explain to you, oh, he's been eating, you know, nothing for days. Like he doesn't have like there are vast stretches of this movie where he seemingly has no food.
They
but
gave
is
him the
never.
coupons. They
But
gave
he
him the
loses
coupons
those.
that probably go out in like a week.
He loses those instantly. He never uses them.
I think we're led to believe that he is given more, though. I feel like they're taking care of him to the bare essentials.
I would disagree because I think they own. And I want to talk. I'll tie this into something I want to talk later. Is that I think his food is really interesting as a way that they show him in kind of like good times versus bad. So like the first time you see him eating, he's eating like mustard and ketchup saltine sandwiches because he
My
has
favorite.
nothing. And then he starts figuring out how to collect the carts and return them for the money. And he starts eating Burger King. But then they hire somebody kind of to screw him over, so he can't do that anymore. And he's back to eating like ketchup and saltine sandwiches. I think he had like a relish sandwich in there too, which
They're
looked
really
repulsive.
cool if he dies on the side of the airport and just like rots. Why people
Right,
are
but like
trying to consider
until Diego Luna starts helping him, there is
it.
no functional food source for this guy. And I think I think if you started, I think that's part of the reason they play the timeline so bizarre, is that if you really dug into the timeline, that you would have to address that the fact that this guy is eating, condiments and crackers for days on end. And like you'd have to talk about the fact like why isn't Hank's lost 40 pounds during this movie because he's eaten nothing for weeks.
Or another mistake is what about family or any life that he had back in Krakosha? They never established at all or care at all about what his life was before. Made just a tiny bit about his dad near the end. But like, what is he
Yeah,
leaving behind? What was his career? We can assume that maybe he was like some kind of construction
he's
worker or
got to be
contractor.
because he's too good at it. He's
He's
too
too
good at
good
it to
at
just
it.
like randomly pick that up.
But they don't discuss that. They don't care at all that he left his life behind. They don't really touch upon that. It's more of him just being stuck, but not everything he's lost.
Yeah, but they don't touch on like the hardship. They don't focus strictly on the hardship of being stuck in the airport, but they don't focus on anything in the past. I think it's actually like a really interesting movie to talk about in terms of what you focus on, what you spend time focusing on, and what you don't, because it makes a lot of really interesting choices that
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with a lot of them. Like I like this movie and I enjoy a lot of it, but I also definitely have some really glaring like it's one of these ones you start talking about and you're like, yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like why he would just, they don't
I
talk
don't think
about it.
they try to make it make sense or make it exist in a real world.
No, and this is I think goes back to the Spielberg is he is using his Jurassic Park Raiders like fantasy idea where like everybody in the airport just loves this foreign guy who walks around, pushing carts, and it's like there's never like a people never are that mean to him outside of like the really higher ups, which seems unlikely in real life that no one would ever have beef with him. Um,
No, he's the
anything else?
hero of the working man. Everyone loved him.
He is the hero of the working man. Anything else to say about Hanks and this role, or like, at least in the concept of Hanks taking the role?
No, I said I will kind of talk about it later, but I think he was probably much more interested in that first half
Yeah,
of the experiment of communicating. You said reacting. He was really existing just by reacting to things happening without having to speak up for himself. So I think the second half he maybe is less cared about, and I think it kind of shows in some. But
yeah. They also seem to they make it easier for him the second half. It's just a lot more like, hey, be Tom Hanks, say words in
and
kind of an
there's
accent.
10 new plot points that come in that you didn't know existed until the last half hour.
Yeah. So talking about the Hanks performance, let's talk about the honor of this character. So from the beginning, Tucci, as like the head of the airport, is trying to get rid of him. He keeps waiting. He's basically the idea is they can't let him into the country because his passport is invalid because his country had a coup. But he can't get arrested because he's technically not doing it illegally. So they keep trying to get him to try to leave, thus they can arrest him for breaking immigration law. But the Tucci also made the mistake of telling him from the beginning, you have to stay here. And he really takes this to heart. And there's I guess it kind of ties back into the Hanks is a hero thing, is that he kind of just does this in every movie, even in a movie where like he can't communicate. He's always going to be the guy who plays by the rules, who is selfless, who kind of puts everyone needs above his own. So like at least from the beginning, it's really about he's going to follow the rules, even if breaking the rules might be better for him. And then as you get towards the end of the film, it's a little bit more out about he's going to put others like health and well-being above his own. Like he will never let anybody else get sacrificed or hurt if he can do anything to prevent it. And he's kind of very like protective of everyone.
Yeah, he's the epitome of nobility. And you know, after he keeps the other guy, is he from Cracovia or like Hungary or something? The other guy trying to take pills back to his father after he saves them. That's when people were all, you know, like spreading the legend of, you know, Tom Hanks's character on how he's standing up for everybody is a magical thing, and you kind of feel like that's just like people spreading the legend of like how great Tom Hanks is, and he stands up for, you know, the average man, and he's the guy we can all aspire to be. It was kind of a he was like creating his own myth throughout this character. I do think he goes against the grain in a couple movies around the same time. I think it's part of his challenges, but for the most part, that noble hero was, yeah. That this is, I think his idea of what it meant to be a leading blockbuster man was kind of old fashioned in a way of like it means that you are representing the moral value of, you know, the country.
Yeah, it's very much staying in his like James Stewart lane of like,
Yeah.
you know, he has to be he is the best of us at all times, the one who always makes the right choices, who always is humble, who always is, you know, looking out for others and trying to do his best, even if
You
he
have to
isn't.
imagine if he would have done like 30 movies with Frank Capra if he existed in the 40s.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, he would have been Frank Capra's guy. Um, and then at the end, I think it's really important to talk about at the end of the movie, he basically could go into New York, and Tucci threatens him, saying, "Hey, I can take out all these other people who have done stuff that they're not supposed to do. If you try to do this, it's a very weird role." And we're going to talk more about this specific Tucci section later. It's a very weird character. But yes, he kind of just he was willing to sacrifice his dream to protect other people, and that's just kind of like the really quiet, humble, you know, nobility of like a Tom Hanks character.
Yeah, his dream to leave and get jazz signatures, which you don't know about until the last half hour. But sure, yes, I feel like they switch what his dream is or why he is staying multiple times through the movie to suit the purpose of making sure he is that, you know, noble guy. They changed the purpose of that he really wanted to go to New York to get these signatures. However, because he's such a nice guy, he's going to take upon that dream to, you know, keep all his friends he made safe and within their jobs. But before that, it seemed like he didn't really have a dream and he was just stuck and had no other option. But all of a sudden, so that he can seem like a great guy, they have to give him something to sacrifice.
Absolutely. And let's move on and talk about, you know, you wanted to talk about this, which is that the airplane terminal is an interesting setting for a
Yeah.
film.
I mean, for most part, this is, I think, my favorite thing about the movie. It's like my least favorite and my favorite thing. I feel like the evolution of my reaction to watching this airplane terminal just kind of exist is my evolution of how I feel within a airport. A lot of people are really scared of planes, and I'm not. I like being on planes. I like doing nothing and having an excuse to do nothing for an amount of time that I just sit there and watch movies, and no one can tell me otherwise. That's why I like being sick as well. Um, but fucking airports are like top five anxiety-inducing things for me, more than airplanes. And that
Mhm.
first 5 minutes of just watching, which is like I like watching directors capture, you know, environments just function as
Mhm.
opening credits. That's my ideal opening credits, and I think Spielberg does a great job. It's just like watching people go through like luggage and security, and it really creates the environment you're gonna be part of, but also has like a sense of nostalgia because it's all like stuff you've experienced before.
Mhm.
But I'm like that first 5 minutes, I'm a nervous fucking wreck. I just think like I'm gonna be late for my plane, and like I have to go through security. And it could be so long, and who knows? I might find something actually in my bag, and my mind goes like this. But just like in an airport, actually, I eventually get over it the further I get into the airport. Once I get past security, once I'm able to get to my seat, I chill out, and I can like I find a lot of enjoyment within this like mall-esque environment of having just like random stores and foods and people from around the world around you. And I feel like that's how I evolved with enjoying the environment within the movie, as I was like stressed the fuck out because airports, who knows what can happen, and you have Tom Hanks in security, and that just makes me nervous too because airport security, basically cops. Um, and but once you get to that, more chilled out environment, I'm like, yeah, look at these. Looks like random like Discovery store. That's cool. I want to go to this Discovery store, and I feel like it hits that sense of nostalgia of just being, a kid in wonder with everything happening around you in an airport eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I do love the opening where it's like they setting up all the tape and like basically all the ways to direct people so that everyone gets ready for all the planes that are coming in. It's not an airport is not an inviting environment. So the idea of making somebody basically live there is kind of interesting because it's kind of hectic and dirty
It,
and kind of a mess and not.
it's an artificial city, is what it is.
Yeah,
It's like
basically it is an artificial city that you should exist in 2-hour chunks, not for like even a full day, let alone longer than that. Like it is set up so like there is not enough stores to fit the needs of a person who's living there. There's basically like there's some gift shops, you can grab some books as you go through. There's like, various like quick food places, places to grab a bite. But the
I'm
idea
not
of an
gonna.
air Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think you're too negative about this. I think I could make it like a month and happily live in an airport for a month. I think I'll be cool because they say once I pass security, I won't have to go there if I'm living within the terminals. Once I get past that and I have no place to go to be late for, like it's just like chill. I don't know. You sit in chairs. You can lay. I've laid on the floors. I slept on the floors of airports before. There's like no rules.
There's no showers
I
though.
just
That's the
like.
problem.
I think the environment just like strangers, and you just create all these stories. And I think the movie deals with that a little bit of just like how there's no place like it. An airport, we have people of just so many different cultures and countries all existing in one place, especially in an
Mm.
international terminal that this takes place in.
Yeah.
And it's a special place, and I'll go hang out. I won't talk to nobody, but I'll hang out there.
What do you think about like how much they bring the other people in the airport into the story? Like, do they do it too much?
No, I don't. I think they don't do it enough.
They don't
I
do
think
enough.
they,
Okay.
I think they, I think no one should be supporting characters. I think it should just be him interacting with like one person at a time and how
Mm,
he evolves based on the interactions he has with people around the world, or how he changes all of them. But they really give like six real supporting characters instead,
right.
plot lines, and they just don't matter. But I think
Mm,
they should just make none of the plot lines matter, and it more be like his evolution as a character matters based on his interactions constantly. Because you got to imagine he interacted with so many more people, and they really focus on the workers. And I think not enough on people coming in and out as well.
yeah. Yeah. So I know you had mentioned this to me when talking about this film, is that you were saying this plot is contrived. Um, I
Yeah,
will
I
point out.
sent you the message saying, "Hey, I want to talk about how I don't think this can happen. I can't imagine there's like Stanley Tucci is in charge of all this, and they just let this guy just like exist. Like there has to be someone coming to play. Like this is like a serious diplomatic matter that needs to be taken care of and would not be handled this lightly." And then you go, guess what? It's a true story.
It is based on a story of an Iranian man who got stuck in, I believe, France.
Yeah,
Yes, he's stuck in
I would,
Charles de Gaulle Airport for 18 years
it's a life.
because I believe he got his documents stolen, and they couldn't get any more because I guess he was kind of fleeing Iran. Um, so actually, the interesting thing
That
about this
question still exists. Because first of all, if if he lost his citizenship because of the coup and he does not exist to a country, first, where is he flying from? Is he not flying from Krakosia with a bunch of other Krakosians on the plane? He can't be the only person in Krakosia that then gets stuck in the air. There has to be someone else from this country flying at the same time.
this is actually
Like,
an excellent point that I had not thought of till now, which is that it would be very unlikely that you would have a direct flight from this random small Eastern European nation to the United States that does not have other inhabitants of the same country. So unless they all had passports for other countries as well, you're right. It should have been more than one. I do think there's I do think there's an interesting question though, which is that the original story is
lost documents. It's different.
Lost documents. It is
it's not
different.
A crisis. It's not a national crisis happening in someone's country. And you would have to think, I don't know how things work at all because I'm a dumbass. But I would have to think that they would be able to like fast pass him towards asylum because he is a refugee. At this point, he's a refugee.
I do think there's two things to point out here, which is one, it's interesting that the original story is about an Iranian man, so like a country that has some stigma around it, or like people could potentially feel more threatened by, versus Tom Hanks from this fake Eastern European nation. I do think it is interesting how the film acts like there's nothing they can do. Like,
yeah,
they like in the
no
entire
one tries. They don't show anyone. This would be a bigger.
There's one moment in the film. There's one moment in the film where Stanley Tucci brings Tom Hanks' character into his office and goes, "Hey, are you as scared of going back to your country?" And basically, like the idea is that if he says yes, then maybe they could get him asylum. And this is the only moment in the film that anyone tries anything to deal with this situation. No one talks to an ambassador, an immigration lawyer,
no.
whichever senator or congressperson this district is in New York. Why isn't somebody talking to Chuck Schumer or something? Like, why isn't there anyone in this movie that's trying to do something about this?
I mean, I don't expect the movie to do this because it's not the point, but it just leads me to believe that there's no way this whole story happens. There's just not. And definitely, Stanley Tucci would not be in charge of this. Head of airplane security is the guy of handling this guy who's lost his country from a coup. There would have to be someone from the government or from like Krakosia. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the word embassy, helping out with this.
Well, maybe not even the embassy.
There's no Krakosia embassy in the U.S. There's no ambassador to come help with this.
Yeah, the customs director, I don't think, would end up with some kind of very complicated immigration-related case. Like, there has got to be a judge or a lawyer that would be here. Yeah, it is interesting how they almost play.
Just papers.
It's kind of yeah. It feels like there would have been a way to be like, this is a valid passport. Like, we can't like hold. I don't know. There feels like they would have done something more. It's a weird plot. Like, even the fact that it's based on a real story, but it's not. It's based on the idea that somebody got stuck in an airport.
Yes. It did.
It is minimally related to this guy's story. Different airport, different nationality, different person, different reason, different, like, basically everything. Yeah, so but again, this is the Spielberg kind of, the fancifulness of Spielberg, in that it's way more interesting if he makes it a fake country, because if he makes it a fake country, then he can kind of make up the rules about why this person is stuck there.
But you can't make up rules on how general asylum works. And
no, of course not. But the more stuff you put in your story that is like not true to fact, the less you base your story in the real world, and the more he can kind of play with the airport as some kind of like almost fantasy airport. Like, it's not like a real airport. It's got all this.
It's stuff like a diorama city. Little city diorama.
Yeah, it's a little interesting.
The shoebox girls.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about two while we're on it, because I'm
connected
that he's not in charge of it. No one in the world has ever thought their job was more important than Stanley Tucci in this. This guy thinks he is like the keeps America from the next World War III. He is the only thing standing in the line between the safety of the American people, and he is the top line. He speaks with such arrogance. Every time something happens, he makes a joke like, this happened last week. That guy's not going to make it back again. And he gets a little laugh, and everyone cheers for him like he saved the day. For catching Japanese tourists trying to go to Disney World for some reason?
Chinese,
sorry. Chinese tourists. I don't know what they were doing wrong. I half understood that, but he acted like he just saved the world. And everyone should congratulate him. And no one could do the job but Stanley Tucci.
There's also a couple. He does have that like Sherlock Holmes thing almost, where like he's a little too brilliant.
Yeah,
Like
I
he's
know.
just
And
like
he's running his own procedural in his head. Tucci is. He thinks
he's
he is.
sitting up. He's sitting up there with the cameras and being like, "Hey, those Chinese people have Disneyland T-shirts on, but they don't have cameras. They must be fakes." Instead of like they have cameras in their bags or something, like which is like the way more likely option. There's also a hilarious moment of the movie where he talks about Tom Hanks doing construction, and somebody's like, he's making $19 an hour, and he goes, "I don't even make that much. I don't know if I just did this little math problem. $19 an hour, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. It's like
There's no way this guy
it's
does not make it.
$40,000. The head of the airport makes more than $40,000, even in like 2004. Like that is insane. 40,000 bucks is not a lot of money, especially if you are literally the guy, the customs director of an airport.
Especially when he's saving the day every day
I know. Hey
from
man, no one
coke
would
dealers hiding it
Walmart.
in walnuts. But it really happens like four times where he'll like be help solving some thing happening within customs, and he will always make the same joke and the same laugh. Like it's the end of a like cop show on NBC making the pun about the dead body.
He's a
Every
really kind
time.
of he's a really generic villain, if we're being honest.
Why is he even a villain? This
Well, he
why
really
is
wants
he
the promotion. He
needed
wants
an
the promotion.
antagonist?
He wants the promotion, and for some reason, Hanks being there really pisses him off. Even
Yeah,
though it's
he
not,
just
even though it's
decides
not
to
his
be mad
fault,
at
and
him.
even though it's not Hank's fault, you can't really blame Tucci for Hanks being there. It's not like Tucci wrote the immigration laws.
He's also not doing anything. He's just like playing cards in the back and falling in love with air stewardesses. He's not causing any issues. Leave the guy alone. He just needs something to be like mad about. He needs like a constant problem to fix, and this is like a problem he needs to fix. He just needs to be right. I don't know, but it makes no sense that he cares at all.
Well,
Also, not his responsibility.
it feels like the ultimate sort of fantasy movie where, of course, the bad character is the guy who really likes, who really cares about his job, and everybody else kind of doesn't care. And like it's kind of lazy, to be honest. Like
I
it's not a
think
very interesting motivation for like why you're so pissed at everyone. And then he just like starts being a jerk, where it's like in the beginning we're told this guy's really good, and then at some point it's just like, oh, he does all this sneaky, tricky stuff, like, oh, hey, Tom Hanks, the guards are gonna walk away from the store for 5 minutes, and you could walk out, even though you know that's illegal, and I told you not to do it originally. And it's just like,
he just baits him to get arrested
yeah, he's kind of a, yeah,
and
he's really
like
like just
call the
generic
authorities.
bad.
And I feel like it changes real fast. Sometimes you like feel he's on the side and maybe he is, but then it changes so suddenly that it's actually like they're calling the authorities. I mean, it seems like he keeps going to do the nice thing. He could have been a nice guy that's really trying to look out for him, and the movie would have worked. You don't need the antagonist in the story. That's not the antagonist. Is the airport is being stuck in the airport.
And
That's the
honestly,
concept.
I think it makes it worse that we have
It makes it
spent
worse.
all this time fighting with Tucci, rather than Tucci being the guy who just comes up to him every 30 minutes and being like, "Hey, I'm trying to talk to this lawyer about this," or like just like Tucci could be a really easy like plot device character who just provides updates in the whole immigration story, rather than being this guy who's just like constantly trying to screw him over. Like the whole scene where he hires somebody to pick up the carts so that Hanks can't do it himself and get the like quarters or something so he can get big Burger King. Like that is
Yeah.
just such a petty,
Dick
pathetic
move.
dick move. It's so sad. It's not even like a big villain move. It's just lazy and pathetic.
No,
It's just like, come on.
you should have just hired him. Just like, hey, get cards, we'll pay you.
Or you should have just been like, "Well,
You're doing nothing
we
wrong.
won't pay you, and we'll let you collect the carts and get freaking quarters that you buy Big Macs with." Oh my God, it's like that's like we're losing $1.25 a day.
What this movie becomes is Mouse Hunt. It's just like people that are mainly just mad because they can't catch the mouse. He doesn't know how to get rid of him, so his anger grows bigger just because that mouse keeps running around his goddamn airport. Not doing anything. It's just the fact that he hasn't won. He's just upset because he hasn't won and he hasn't caught him or solved the problem. And that's not good enough motivation for me
Yeah,
to be.
absolutely.
And
So another
Tucci plays with so much arrogance that I think is annoying. I don't think his performance is good. Do you think it's good for 5 minutes and then it grows old?
Yeah, because it's really one note and it doesn't always make sense.
Confusing.
We've already talked about this a little bit, but the reason, or at least the reason that Hanks came to New York is he wanted to get the final signature from this jazz artist that his dad loves from some picture, and he's been putting all of them inside of a peanut jar or peanut can. Um, I think this is an interesting choice that I think works better for me than it does for you.
I
Like I
I
think the
think it
ending
would have worked. It could have worked.
I think the ending is very emotional and I think kind of powerful, and he talks about it. I think it is, but I think the problem is the
That,
only lead up to that point is, oh, he's just randomly carrying a peanut can.
yeah, the
It's never
scene.
seen. It feels like he's just like a weirdo carrying a piece of junk. More so than it feels like this is a really like. There's never a scene in the movie, and all they need to do was a couple scenes earlier where he thought he'd lost it, or somebody thought it was trash, and he felt like you to see the connection to this object before the end that would have helped cement that. Instead, and I think the end part really works, but the lead up to it is just like he's randomly carrying around this thing, and it seems no more valuable than anything else he's carrying
Yeah, because I think the scenes you talked about that were really emotional, I think they work really well in a vacuum. If you just saw those scenes, you're like, I'm interested in this movie, I want to see it, and they are emotional, but they're supposed to be a payoff,
around.
and they don't function as a payoff, and there's literally no lead up,
Yeah,
so it's hard to care about it. They easily could have brought up his mission in the first half hour of the movie. They could have brought up that the first hour you just think he's not leaving because he's stuck. He doesn't want to get arrested. But then they basically act like the only reason he left, even though it's out of his control, is because he's so determined on his mission, which is not true.
yeah,
He's just stuck. He can't. It's not like he's so determined, and that's why he hasn't went back to Kokoja. He can't go back to Kokoja because there's no Kokoja.
right.
So I feel like they changed the whole motivation of this character and what the story's about. I think it would have been a great story to tell. Just you should have made the whole movie about that, about him
Right.
wanting to go help with his dad. Yeah.
Right. Focusing on him fulfilling like his dad's last wish was to get this last signature of these people his dad loved, and like they clearly had a connection over this. And I wish they had set it up better because I think that actually makes the story more impactful, and I think it gives it a driving focus which ties the entire story together, which I think helps the movie.
Yeah. Um, and the only reason it works at all is because jazz is cool. And I'm assuming
Yeah.
they that I could sound arrogant or not arrogant, sorry, ignorant about the jazz I know. But I knew all the musicians they talked about when they were showing the picture, except for the guy they include in the movie, except for the last signature.
Oh
So maybe
yeah.
he's like the one that they could get, like that they could have into the movie, and everyone else died from drug addiction. I don't know, but jazz man. Um, but so I found that amusing, but I think that interaction, I think they should have showed the signature also, so you can see the like result of his dreams coming true. But that happens off camera of him actually getting signature. You just see him get rubbed off. I don't know what the purpose of him like. Oh, I can't sign you right now, and that's how they end that interaction. I think they could have made that interaction more fulfilling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I think our final topic here kind of touches on something that I think is one of the larger problems with the film, which is that rather than solely focusing on this guy and his mission, we threw in two romances. I'm not going to try to speak for Zach. I think they're a little contrived. Um, so Tom Hanks falls for Catherine Zeta-Jones, who's an air stewardess who is sort of with a married guy. Their relationship is never explained, although she really doesn't like it. And then him falling for her is not really explained. I think at least this one is seemingly more straightforward than the other one.
Is it?
I think
I
it's more
feel like he
straightforward because
falls
I
for
think
a
it's the
football because she looks like Catherine Zeta-Jones. And she
that's
just
fair.
because he was a nice guy and compared to the guy she was going with, but there was no interactions leading up to it. It was very forced to come together. Their interaction was just like he kept thinking she was talking to him or waving to him. There's no reason for those two people to connect, and they never made it seem worthwhile or seem like it would be. The other one you're going to talk about had more purpose in its story being driven, and I think a lot more charm and authenticity in the relationship. It's just
And
a sweeter thing.
back to the Jones and Hanks one, that romance goes nowhere. It is. I mean, I'm not saying it should, but it's almost completely pointless. Like you could have cut it out of the plot, and
yeah, it's not needed, and that's why I think the other one, Zoe Saldana, Diego Luna, one we're going to talk about, I think has more purpose and the ideas of the movie of him trying to be, this connector of humanity between characters. And
okay,
this one has no purpose. And I think like a big blockbuster movie needs a love story and needs to have romantic interest, and that's it. When they can cut it out, and he does not need one. I bet you the real guy did not have a love interest. It was not enough.
probably not. Probably not. Although I have a bigger
Maybe that
problem
guy
with
could have been real hip.
the Saldana Luna one, which is that do they ever meet before they get married?
That I think connects to the issue of them having no concept of time. I think we're supposed to believe that that he hooked them up together and they've been together for a year. Honestly, this movie might exist within the 8 years that you say like the other guys lived in. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah,
I think we're supposed to believe that after Hank's interactions talking this guy up in a way, they were together before they got married, and that was just the long evolution of their relationship.
yeah.
I don't think they got married in a day.
No, I don't think they got married in a day. I just think I think less even the time. It's just I don't think it's really clear that they've even spent much time together. It basically just seems to be Tom Hanks giving the messages back and forth, and they're sort of fun scenes with Hanks interacting with the two of them.
I think they are fun. I think they're very Cameron Crowe-esque. They're very like Elizabeth Towny, like in the lesser Cameron Crowe movies that people don't like, but me. Just like this, like very twee, quirky, romantic stuff. Just like love is great. I'm just like look at these people kind of fall in love with each other through an avatar, through another conversation.
Yeah.
And I feel like that could easily seemed creepy. It could have been like Saldana actually thinks Tom Hanks is in her, and that it's where it goes instead. But it is always seems like the characters are aware that the focus is on someone else. That's more on Diego Luna. They never misplace the emotion, which I feel like other movies could have. But I think that's a hard thing to balance, and I think it works because I think Zoe Saldana is super charming in the movie and likable, and I think that's a big reason why that story is able to work more than the Catherine Zeta-Jones one, who I think she's just a nothing of a character, a confusing character. Maybe could have had 20 more pages written for her to make her fleshed out, but they didn't try.
Yeah, I think Saldana is good, really good. I think Luna's kind of a nothing character, if being honest.
Just a little bit, yeah. He's just kind of running on his just like likable spirit.
Yeah, he's not much.
Can we say the most interesting thing about this movie, by far the most interesting thing about this movie, is that Zoe Saldana's character is a Trekkie, which one is interesting because that character is a Trekkie, real. But two, she was in Star Trek. This is all just her this is her audition tape to get into Star Trek.
Star Trek and Star Wars actor bond over love of Trek is an interesting thing to look back at now.
Oh, yeah, I forget he was in Star Wars.
Yeah. Don't have Tom Hanks propose for you. That's weird.
That's how I got proposed to. Tom Hanks come to propose me on his date.
Tom Hanks FaceTimed you and asked you to marry him.
And you said yes. Mr. Rogers in a red sweater and get down on one knee.
All right. So, do you have any final thoughts on the Terminal?
I definitely feel like I do and did have final thoughts, and I forgot them all. My final thoughts might have been Zoe Saldana. It was in Star Trek, and she plays a Trekkie. There we go.
That works. I think you like this movie less than I do, although I think I think this movie really comes down to it at the end of the day. If you like it or not, I think we're gonna have similar critiques, similar things we think are good. The emotional stuff hit me a little harder, I think, than it hit you, and I think that's probably the difference between the two of us in our overall takes. Because a lot of the stuff, even that like I can enjoy some of the emotional moments while taking a step back and being like, yeah, that doesn't really make sense. They didn't set it up well, but maybe the emotion just hit me a little harder.
I'm very proud that especially since we've agreed in the last two, we both liked this first one that any of us don't like to any level. But I'm really proud of the dominance I can have in a conversation that even though you say you like it more, I feel like I definitely made you just talk shit about it for an hour and make you seem like you don't like it. So
Oh, I'm not
proud
gonna.
of that,
It's
Howard.
it's a very flawed movie that I enjoy. Like I will own up to that from the beginning. It has a lot of flaws, and I just happen to enjoy it. Um, but let us move on to sort of a decade of flawed films that we probably don't enjoy, which is Tom Hanks' 2000s run. And I will start by doing what we always do, which is I'll run down the movies that he did during the 2000s. I think the theme of the 2000s, I think you said it was he's picking weird choices. I would also say um, this is a decade where he maybe was a little bit less picky about what he picked and also was let down by some pretty big name people to work with. Like, people he worked with in the past, they kind of like, it's like, hey, do my movie. And it turned out to be kind of bad. So this decade starts off with Castaway in 2000. Everyone's seen this movie. He plays a FedEx employee who is stranded on an island with a volleyball. Goes ahead to Road to Perdition, the Sam Mendes film, which is one of the ones where he plays a enforcer for an Irish mob boss. It's based in a graphic novel. It's kind of one of the ones where Hank does not play a hero. Catch Me If You Can is another Spielberg movie where he plays an FBI agent chasing after Leo DiCaprio. This is kind of the end of the really great run that he started in the 90s. And this is when we go into The Lady Killers in 03, which is a movie by the Coen brothers, which is not good. We just did The Terminal, which is 2004. He cameoed as mailbox Elvis in Elvis Has Left the Building in 2004. Something else to see this decade is he does a lot of like random cameos or like voice stuff more than previous decades. Does the Polar Express? He plays 6 different roles using motion capture. He does the Da Vinci Code, which is the first film in the Robert Langdon trilogy based on the Dan Brown novel. And this is probably, if you consider the fact he made 3 of them, 2 in this decade and 1 in the next, probably one of the biggest flops of his career. He cameos as a car, basically version of Woody in Cars. In Charlie Wilson's War, he plays the Democratic congressman from Texas who was involved with the Mujahideen and supporting them during the Soviet-Afghan War. He cameos as himself in the Simpson movie. He plays the father of Colin Hanks's character, so his real son's character in The Great Buck Howard, and then he comes back at the end of 2009 in Angels and Demons, which is the second film in the Robert Langdon trilogy. And that trilogy is probably the biggest miss of Tom Hanks's career, if we're going to be
And
honest.
the biggest miss of our podcast for not covering it, but okay.
I think The Terminal was far more interesting to talk about.
I mean, we're on our longest episode so far.
That's right. So let's talk about major themes. I think a lot of them is, well, one, after 04, he doesn't really do that much work.
No.
Like, he does the 2 Robert Langdon movies, he does Wilson's War, and he does Polar Express. And the rest of them are basically just like cameos, and I'm Tom Hanks playing Colin Hanks' father, but like I'm not the main character of this. And it's kind of weird to watch a really big actor basically almost disappear for half a decade.
I think what part of it may be, especially I feel like he's a guy who is like naturally aged. He was not someone in his 50s that like still looked as handsome as ever. And so I feel like he got to his 50s and got to a point where he wasn't really this like main leading man that was going to be charming like a romantic lead. He was losing his young romantic leadness and not quite in those, more paternal roles, elderly statesman roles he was able to develop into. He was kind of just in that mid period that is harder to cast. There's just not a lot of stories about that, midlife, mid 50s
I
thing.
think he, I think he also hit that, and he tried to do some stuff, and he got some pretty big whiffs. Like he did Lady Killers, and people really don't like that movie, and it's not good.
You're proving my point. He got bored with the Tom Hanks persona and doing the same thing and being a noble hero. And it really starts with Castaway. That every choice you can see what drew him to it. It was some kind of gimmick or some kind of brand redevelopment, something that was different for him. Castaway, you're being on an island by yourself. You have no one to interact with. said terminal, you're interacting with people, but you don't have language for an hour.
Yeah,
Um, Da Vinci Code being, an Indiana Jones type character, being an action adventure hero for a franchise that he never really did. Toy Story is a franchise, but that's a different thing.
yeah.
So being a franchise lead, Lady Killers, being like a despicable human, which is so against the Tom Hanks type. Same with Road to Perdition, being an anti-hero. That was really where he was able to vibe kind of this Tom Hanks of a paternal person, but he
Mhm.
was, a mob hitman. Still unlikable. These are all different choices compared to anything he would have made before, really trying to challenge his brand, and people aren't buying it, and people are unfair to accepting new things from him, and think like Polar Express doing motion capture. That's something new. It's a new experiment. He was just
Yeah.
trying to, I think, stay in love with his career by not finding a comfort spot.
I think there's also some of it is when you're Tom Hanks and you're on this crazy run going all the way back to like Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
and then you do a movie and people go, "That's not good." I think that's one of the reasons you see him work less in the rest of the decade. At the end of this, the
You think
2000s,
Tommy got his feelings hurt?
I think Tom. I don't even know if it was feelings as much as I think he was worried about his legacy. I think he's a smart enough actor to go, this is the first time people don't like my work. What am I doing? And I think that's why you see him doing just cameos and just voices and stuff. Is that I think he got a little gun shy of being like, he'd been the guy who had picked the right role for so many years. Like he had like a 10 or 12 movie streak, and then he starts hitting like 2004, 2005, 2006, and he just does this stuff that should work. Like a movie with the Coen brothers should work. Robert Langdon and going back with Ron Howard should work. Like all the stuff that should work, and it doesn't. And I think
But
he
they
really
weren't Tom Hanks characters, and that's why they didn't work. He was always picking Tom Hanks personas. He was known as
sure.
Tom Hanks plays Tom Hanks on screen. So he was, the whole decade was trying something different, really, until Cloud Atlas.
But it's not just not being Tom Hanks characters. Those movies have other flaws that his previous movies didn't have. Like Lady Killers is not a good movie besides the Tom Hanks character. And I think he did get a little gun shy, and I think that's why you just see less work from him.
Yeah. That he will talk about next week, but he does really get his footing. I think like Cloud Atlas, which I like, but that was his last like bizarre movie, and then he really gets into his newer, older brand of, um, the elder statesman, of the responsible elder man that still represents the moral core. Everything we came to know, he with Tom Hanks, he comes back to.
It is interesting. He does really outside of a couple movies, um, there's a couple big whiffs thrown into the 2010s. He definitely does go back to the Tom Hanks persona we've kind of like everybody knows and loves
Just the
in
old
like
version.
the real life hero, every man, clear collar, blue collar American, stuff like that. Yeah, it really is like 2013 on is when he kind of
I
gets back to that.
I want to, even though the movie isn't that good, I just want to stand up for Weird Hanks. Let's not undervalue Weird Hanks. We all think he plays himself, but he did a whole decade of just being a weirdo.
Yeah,
This is like when Garth Brooks became Chris, what should we call it? What's his name? Chris Gaines. This was Tom Hanks's Chris Gaines period where he was developing a different persona. I
yeah.
mean, it's interesting, and people need to value that time career as a quirk. It's and something good to talk about, and that's why the show was so good to talk about, because it was something outside of the norm with them. Otherwise, they're saying the same things over and over again.
Right. You can only talk about how great Tom Hanks and Tom Hanks movies are for so long. And I think the Terminal is kind of a cool one to talk about because
The middle period,
it has some really good ideas. It has some really good people behind it. Some stuff works, some stuff doesn't, and the choices are kind of interesting at times. So it always promotes some discussion.
yeah.
And I think we've reached the end of our discussion of the 2000s Tom Hanks run and the film The Terminal. Next week we're going to come back talk 2010s Hanks, kind of a return to form, and we're going to focus on Zach is
My
so
heart.
excited for Zach's
We're gonna
heart.
focus on the deepest, darkest holes of my heart.
A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, of course, the Mr. Rogers film. We all love Mr. Rogers. If you don't like Mr. Rogers, please seek help.
No, if you don't like him, listen to the show and let us, not in Mr. Rogers, but let's convince you
We will convince
on
you.
why it's important to watch this movie and reflect on yourself and become a better person, just like Mr. Rogers wants us to.
Absolutely. And with that, thank you everybody for listening, watching, and engaging with us in whatever you have. Thank you, Zach, for providing a less positive note on the terminal and now doing weird hands.
Piano. I'm playing our outro song. Beep, 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 beep.
That has been Zach. I am Lucas, and we will see you next week when we discuss A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood.